Alright guys, so you've had a minute here to look at this. I gave you a graph and said, what is the amplitude, period, midline? Would it best be represented as sine or cosine? And can we put it all together and write it as a sine or cosine equation? Alright, let's just start with Brian. Tell me something about it, Brian.
How high it goes with amplitude.
Alright, how high it goes from what? Like from the bottom?
From like the zero.
There we go. Alright, so let's do this. This is what I usually do on these, is I'm going to start by drawing a line at the maximum. And the maximum is what, Brian?
4.
Great. And then the minimum is negative 4. What's halfway between 4 and negative 4? It's not a hard question. Halfway between 4 and negative 4 is 0, right? Alright. So 0, this is called what? What is the vocab word we're going to use for that? That is your midline. Now, on your quiz today, when you write your midline, you need to write it as an equation. And the way you're going to write it is you're going to put y equals 0. Because when you do y equals a number, it's a horizontal line. So y equals 0, that is our midline. Now what that means is our maximum is going to be y equals 4, or I'll just put 4 on that one. And our minimum is negative 4. So Brian, what does that mean the amplitude is? How much was it stretched from 0?
4.
By 4. There you go. The amplitude is just 4. Alright, cool. Jade, what does it mean when we talk about period? Awesome. So we'll go through one cycle. So I'm going to highlight this. It's going to go up, down, and it completes a cycle at what? How long did that take? Pi. So the length of one cycle here is just pi. What is it normally? So is this going faster or slower? How much faster is this going? It's going 2 times as fast. If it and if you wanted to keep going here, look, how many of these cycles could we draw before we get to 2 pi?
2.
I could draw 2. So that means that b is 2. It's going through twice as fast. Now, if you're like, that doesn't make sense, let me show you a different way you could do that. Do you remember what our formula is for period? Period is what?
2 pi over b.
Good. Now, we don't know what b is. That's what we're trying to figure out. But we just said the period for this graph was just pi.
So now you have to switch pi and b, I guess?
Yeah, I'm going to
And
switch
then-
them spots. Or you could just think in your brain, what would I plug in to be b that would reduce this from 2 pi to just pi?
We have to get rid of the 2, so we divide it by 2, and that would give us pi left.
Okay, and we're going to do this a couple more times, so if it takes a minute to sink in, that's okay. We're going to switch spots here, and what that gives me is that b is 2 pi over pi, which is just 2, because the pi's cancel out. So b is 2. That's how I make it go through twice as fast. Okay, lastly on this, Antonio, is this better described as a sine or a cosine graph? How come? Nice job. So if we were to write this whole thing out, okay,
Can I have a swing at it? 'Cause I think I know.
go for it.
So for sine, in parentheses we have 2 times theta, or x, or whatever we use in there, because sometimes they put x.
Uh-huh. And that's it. With the plus 0, do I need to put a plus 0? No, it just keeps it where it is. There you go. That's the equation. Nice job. Does that make sense? Okay, we're going to go through about 4 or 5 of these examples before you take your quiz today. All right? Now, there was some things that I forgot to add in that I've since added in, and I was like, oh yeah, you should know that. Let me tell you this, okay? Let's talk about that right now. When we were doing our family of functions project, you had to learn all the different functions like x squared and 1 over x and cube root, all those fun things. We learned all the transformations. What did a negative do? do to my graph? If this is x squared, show me with your hands. What does negative x squared look like? It flips it over. So if I have x cubed times by negative flips it over the x-axis. Will that do the same thing for sine and cosine? Yeah, except if sine is this, what am I going to do? I'm going to flip it, so instead of going up, what does sine start by doing? Going down. Awesome. Let me show you how that is going to work here.
Okay,
Who am I looking at back there? Is that Adrian? Adrian! You're here! I'm so happy. Have you seen Rocky? Adrian! Anyone know that reference? Okay, well, Adrian, the notes are in the back. Just hop in with what we're doing. Thanks for being here. On that back desk right there. Okay, so here's what we're going to do, guys. Sorry, I got a little distracted there. Let's graph plain old sine. So I'm going to graph plain old sine. And you don't have to write this down. You can if you want. Sine starts at 0. It goes up, back to 0, down to -1, and then finishes at 2 pi. This is what sine of x looks like. So then, my question for you is, what would negative sine of x look like? Well, what I'm going to do is, all of the x-intercepts, they're going to stay x-intercepts because they're on the x-axis, so they don't flip. But what does 1 turn into? -1, good. And what does -1 turn into? So this is now flipped, so it goes down and then up. That makes it negative sign. Okay? So if you times by negative on the outside, that is just going to flip over the x-axis. Let's try that with cosine as well. Isaac, how do you graph cosine? Plain old cosine.
Start at 1
Uh-huh.
and go to 1. Or yeah.
Pi halves, okay? And then -1 here, 0, and get back, right? So we did this a lot last week. And so now what are we going to do to make that negative cosine? If it was 1, now it becomes -1. X-intercepts stay there. If it was -1, it becomes 1, and then just like that. So that's what timesing by a negative does. It flips it. So if you see examples here where, it like looks to be doing the opposite, it means it's being times by a negative. Okay, let's go to this one. This one is in your notes, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do on these, we're going to follow the same pattern. I'm going to give you about a 1-minute head start. And what you're going to do is, with a buddy or a neighbor or someone by you, you're going to try to fill in the amplitude, the period, the midline, whether it's sine or cosine, and come up with the equation. Remember, it'll look something like this, okay? So let me give you a minute. We'll get started on that. And it shouldn't be quiet right now. You should be talking and trying to brainstorm with your neighbor, talking out loud, okay? Antonio's going to help you out, right? Do you have a pencil or something? There's a brown box up there. All right, Skylar, I'm going to have you start this off. Tell me just something about it. You can choose any of those, but tell me something about this graph. Yeah, awesome. Let let me kind of draw that out because I like highlighting it. So our maximum value, guys, is where? Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell with the scale. That's actually 3. Let me kind of draw that because this is 1 right here. So then that's 2. So that's going to be up at 3. Okay, cool. So the max is at 3. So where is the minimum going to be? -3. What's halfway between 3 and -3? Okay. Now remember, how do you need to write this on your quiz? What is the equation of the midline? Thank you. If you don't add the y equals, it's actually going to mark you wrong. So make sure you put in y equals 0. Now, this is being stretched up by 3 and stretched down by 3. What does that affect? What is our vocab word for that? The amplitude is 3. Nice job. The distance from the midline to the max is 3, and that should match the distance from the midline to the minimum. Okay, cool, cool, cool. Okay, now let's switch gears here. Let's go to Emma. Emma, if I were to trace this, how long does it take for me to go through a cycle? So normally it takes 2 pi, but this time it took 4 pi. So the length of one cycle is 4 pi. So guys, is this going faster than normal or slower than normal? It's going slower. How much slower? If usually it takes 2 pi to go through a cycle, and now it's taking 4 pi, how much slower is that? Yeah, let's do that. So I'm going to do period is 2 pi over b. But now we know that the period is 4 pi. So what I'm going to need to do here, I want to solve for b. And do you remember how the last time we said, oh, just switch them spots? I'm going to put 4 pi in the denominator and bring b out. And what that gives me is that the b value is 2 pi over 4 pi.
Which the pi should cancel out, so it would be 1/2 because 2 4
That reduces to 1/2. Now, that should kind of make sense because this, on the example we did right here, when I was going through twice as fast, the value of b was 2. This time we're going slower. How much slower are we going? We're going half as fast. And that's making it so by the time I get to 2 pi, I'm only halfway done. So b is 1/2. But you can solve for it algebraically that way. All right, nice job, Emma. Does that make sense why the value of b is 1/2? Brian, is this better represented as a sine or a cosine graph? Well, I guess the question here is, what's the difference between sine and cosine? Where does sine start? Nope, that's actually cosine. If you remember here, sine starts at 0, because remember when we made the wiki sticks? We said sine measures height, and the height at 0 is 0, so sine starts at 0 and then goes up. Cosine, we measured the length. It started at, its value was 1, because the length at 0 was 1. So with that in mind, Brian, which one does this look more like?
Cosine.
This is going to be cosine. Good job.
I have the equation. Did I say it?
No, you said it last time.
Ah,
Who's going to say it this time? How about Jade?
Rude.
Jade, put all those pieces together.
So it would be 3 cosine. And it would be theta.
Great. That's it. Now, you could also write it like this, and sometimes this is how you're going to see it. 3 cosine of theta divided by 2. Is timesing by 1/2 and dividing by 2, is that the same thing? Yeah, that's the same thing. Okay, cool. There you go. Alright, there's that one. You feel okay with that? We're just going to do this a couple more times and take your quiz. So, same idea here. Now, the last two have been centered at 0. The midline was 0. Is this one going to have the midline at 0? Obviously not. At the 0, it's not in the middle. So, this one's going to have a vertical shift as well as changes to the amplitude and period. So, let me give you another minute here. Take the time to talk to a neighbor and brainstorm. Try to come up with those key features and the equations. Oh, can I pause you real quick? The graph on here, I must have put something in wrong, but just to kind of help you out here, let's pretend that it actually ends exactly at 2 pi. So it's able to get in 3 cycles in the time it normally takes to get in 1. So it's going in 3 times as fast. For some reason, it didn't match up perfect, but pretend that that point goes to right there, okay? Okay, let me give you another 30 seconds and we'll go over this. Alright, let's just go over this together. Okay, David Espinoza, tell me something about it. Good. How did you get that? So that midpoint there would be 1. Awesome. So max is 3, minimum is -1, so the midline is 1. And when I put that in, how do I write it? Y equals 1. Good, that's the equation. If it asked for most of the things you just put in a number, but if it asked for an equation, you just put a y equals. Well, that makes it pretty easy to see the amplitude. Who sees what the amplitude is there?
2.
Why is it 2? How much does it stretch?
2.
From the midline to the max is 2, and from the midline to the min is 2. It should be the same, so the amplitude is 2. Would this better be represented as a sine or cosine? How come it's cosine? Yeah, it starts at the maximum. If it starts at the midline, it's sine. Start at the max, it's cosine. So now the tricky one here was period. This one got a little bit messed up, but let's ask this. How many cycles does this complete in the time it normally takes to complete 1? We do 1, 2, 3. So if the period if it's going through 3 times as fast, what does that tell us about B?
We have to we're dividing. B is 3.
B is 3, yeah. If I go back to like this very first one, when I was going through twice as fast, B was 2. When I was going through half as fast, B was 1/2. So if I'm going through 3 times as fast, B is 3, okay? All right, let's put all that together. Let's let Antonio do this. Antonio, how am I going to write this whole equation out? Awesome. But then how do you've got one more thing, I need to shift it up 1. plus 1. There you go. There's your equation. And by the way, how do you check your work here? You go on decimals. Go ahead.
Why is the period 3?
So the period is not 3. The period is actually 2 pi over 3. And part of the reason, it's a little messed up because I don't know what I did, but it was supposed to end at 2 pi, but it did. So if I look at this, okay, and I say, how many cycles did it get through in the time it took to got to 2 pi? And I said, pretend it was right there. How many cycles did it go through?
Oh, okay, 3.
Went through 3, so it's going through 3 times as fast. If you wanted to use a formula, you could, because a period here, if I take the 2 pi and cut it up into thirds, that's actually the length of one cycle. It's 2 pi divided by 3. And then if I do 2 pi divided by 2 pi over 3, keep, change, flip, I end up getting 3 is B. Does that help answer that? Okay, cool. Thanks for asking the question. Okay, this one is a tad bit tricky. We're just going to kind of go over this one together right from the beginning. But let's start at the same place. Let's look at what is the max, what is the minimum, what is the midline. So, Oscar, what is our maximum value there?
3.
What's our minimum value? All right, so guys, what's halfway between 3 and negative 5?
-1.
Yeah. And I can, when I draw this out, it should make sense that it's at -1. And I'm going to check that because it should be halfway. What's the distance from 3 to -1? And what's the distance from -1 to -5? Awesome, so it's halfway, that means it's a midpoint. I just found out 2 things on the graph. What are those 2 things?
The amplitude,
Amplitude is 4, and?
the period, which is also 4.
Nope.
Midline.
The midline, good job, Caroline,
Oh yeah,
is
the midline.
y equals -1. Now, the thing that's a little bit tricky here, guys, is that when I'm looking at this one, I'm going to do this one like, on your quiz, there's going to be some that are like this, where it completes one cycle in exactly 3.
No, couldn't that be cosine because it doesn't start at 0, it starts at -1.
Well, so that's the midline. It shifts it down one. So this is going to be a sine wave because it starts at its
okay,
midline.
never mind, I see that.
But guys, watch me as I trace this, and it's a little hard to see. That's why we're just going over it together. But let's say this ends at exactly 3. So the period is 3. We're used to the period being in terms of pi, like 2 pi or pi halves or something. But if the period is 3, what does that mean B is? Well, we're going to use our formula here. So I'm going to show you how to do this because there's 1 or 2 on the quiz like this. So remember, our formula is period is 2 pi over B. What is our period? How long did it take for it to complete a cycle? It's just 3.
Oh, so it'd be 2 pi thirds.
So then when I switch the B and the 3 spots, what I get is that the value of B, which will make it so the period is 3, is 2 pi over 3. So B is 2 pi over 3. Okay, now we already said this is going to be a sine equation. So Eleanor, tell us what that would look like all put together.
4 sine 2 pi over 3 times theta minus 1.
Okay. Does that make sense? Why everything is everything? Do you have any questions? Okay, here's your last one. It's got 3 transformations. See how you do with it.
We only